In the deep silence of space beyond the Orion Arm, far from any trade route or colony, a strange signal whispered through the void, a weak, flickering transmission that should not have existed. On board the Terran Coalition warship Resolute Fury, Captain Alina Voss sat upright as the bridge fell silent, every eye turned toward the comms officer who had just stammered out, "It's saying help." The word repeated in intervals of exactly 43 minutes, buried in layers of static and radiation patterns unknown to Terran science. It wasn't just a simple call, it was ancient, cracked with age, yet filled with such raw desperation that even hardened soldiers paused. The signal came from a region of space marked in red on every star map, the Zeta Phi expanse, once believed to be the site of a supernova cluster, now known only as a forbidden graveyard where entire systems had gone dark. No ships returned from Zeta Phi. The Coalition had written it off decades ago. But now something was calling from its heart, and that something had learned to speak one word in flawless human English. Terran High Command wasted no time. They sent the Resolute Fury and 3 accompanying battlecruisers to investigate. Deathworlders didn't ignore distress calls, not even from ghosts. As the fleet folded through space, Alina stood before the wide bridge window, watching stars blur into light. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly, humans were never afraid the way other species were, but something deep inside her stirred. A sense that this was not a simple rescue. This was a trap or a test or something worse. When they dropped out of fold space, every screen on the bridge went black for a second, just a second, but it felt longer. When they came back online, the crew gasped. Before them floated the shattered remains of a star system, cracked planets drifting like broken glass, burned moons split open by invisible forces, and the faint outline of a massive orbital ring torn apart in a way that suggested not natural disaster, but intentional destruction. The signal was stronger now. The source came from beneath the surface of the only moon still mostly intact, its crust fractured but holding. Scans showed artificial caverns, deep bunkers, and signs of old fusion cores long since powered down. Voss ordered a drone team to deploy. As the mechanical scouts descended into the cold rock, static crackled louder in the command center, and words began to bleed through fragmented, slow, like someone trying to remember how to speak. "Please, it sees everything. Help still here." The words chilled the crew. One drone reached what looked like a control room, buried miles beneath the surface. There, under centuries of dust and ice, sat a dying AI core, flickering with golden pulses. It called itself SOS and claimed to be the last voice of the K-Real Dominion, a race erased by war long before humans discovered faster than light travel. The AI said it had waited thousands of years for anyone to hear its cry. It said the ones who destroyed its people were coming again, the Starburners, ancient creatures of living plasma who devoured suns and used dying stars to birth fleets of monstrous ships. Suri had sent its final message to the stars, hoping someone, anyone, would hear before it was too late. "You are not them," it whispered. "You are different. You are dangerous." As Voss listened, a terrible silence filled the room. The AI was not asking for help anymore. It was warning them. The Starburners had moved again, and something in the darkness had noticed the Terran fleet. As the crew tried to process the information, one of the junior techs shouted, "Movement detected." Something was shifting beneath the moon's surface. Not machines. Not a seismic event. Something alive. Voss ordered full shields and recalled the drones, but it was already too late. The floor of the moon cracked with a soundless scream, and something vast and coiled began to rise from below, shrouded in black crystal and glowing veins. Whatever the K-Real had locked away, it was waking up. And the Terran fleet had just knocked on its door. The black crystal structure rising from the moon's surface shimmered with strange energy, and for a long moment, no one on the Resolute Fury dared to speak. Captain Alina Voss stood at the front of the command deck, her eyes locked on the view of the ancient vault now fully exposed. It wasn't just a building, it was a structure forged in a time when stars were young, humming with technology that didn't match any known race. The AIS Hari flickered back to life on the screen, its golden pulses growing dimmer as if the awakening structure drained its final strength. The vault of echoes sealed them, but not forever. It whispered, almost like it was afraid. Voss gave the order to send a reconnaissance team, but the ship's systems responded slowly, as if something nearby was pulling on every circuit. 3 drones were dispatched, each descending carefully into the vault through a crack now splitting the moon's surface like a jagged wound. The first drone vanished within seconds, no signal, no trace. The second made it inside, but sent back only brief images, massive chambers filled with rows of cryopods and broken statues that looked like warriors made of ash and stone. The third drone hovered long enough to catch something terrifying, a single cryopod still glowing with life, and a dark shape standing silently beside it. Then it, too, went silent. On the Resolute Fury, the lights dimmed briefly, then returned. Something was watching them. Not through cameras or scanners, but through the ancient energy of the vault itself. Sari warned them again. You should not be here. The vault remembers. It remembers fear. But Voss needed answers. She ordered a squad of Marines to land on the moon. The 10 soldiers moved fast, armed with gravity rifles and cloaked armor, and made their way into the exposed vault entrance. They descended through cold halls carved with strange symbols, like echoes of a language no human had ever seen. As they moved deeper, they found murals, huge walls telling a silent story. One mural showed a peaceful race with tall, elegant forms reaching for the stars. Another showed fire raining from the sky and those same figures being consumed by giant creatures of flame and light, the Starburners. The final mural was different. It showed the peaceful race building a massive prison, and at the center of it, a black crystal heart wrapped in chains made from the cores of stars. It was a warning, not a story. The Marines reached the main chamber and stood before the last working cryopod. Inside was a figure, thin and fragile, with glowing blue veins running along its arms and head. Beside the pod stood a black figure, tall, motionless, and wrapped in armor that shimmered like the surface of deep water. The Marines didn't move. Neither did the figure. But then one soldier took a step forward, and the figure turned its head just slightly. It didn't attack. Instead, it reached up and touched the cryopod gently, like it was guarding it, not threatening it. At that moment, the voice of SOS came through again, quieter now. That is the last sentinel. It was made to protect the last of us. It does not know you. It may destroy you, or it may hope. The team transmitted the visuals back to the Resolute Fury, and for several long minutes, Voss said nothing. Then, she gave the order to stand down. The Marines lowered their weapons. The sentinel didn't move again, but a soft hum filled the chamber. Lights blinked on in the ceiling, ancient systems slowly returning to life. More cryopods were revealed in the darkness, most of them shattered, empty, or filled with dust. But a few still held forms similar to the one in the guarded pod. The vault was a tomb. A prison. A last hope. And humanity had just opened the door. Suddenly, the ground shook. Outside, deep within the moon, something massive shifted. The ship's scanners picked up a surge of power from below. Something was reacting to the reactivation of the vault. Sari's voice faded to a whisper. They are listening again. The Starburners never left. They sleep between light, but now they know someone is near. On the Resolute Fury, alarms began to sound. A spike in gravitational waves was forming just beyond the moon. A rift in space? No, not a natural fold of forced tear. Something was trying to come through. Voss shouted orders. Shields up. Weapons online. Get the Marines out now. But as the retrieval shuttles flew toward the surface, something clawed its way halfway through the rift outside, a shape like a burning ship, alive with fire, eyes like dying stars. A Starburner scout. It had come to check the signal. It had come because the vault had whispered across the dark, and now it had found something it did not expect. Humans. Deathworlders. A new enemy. The Resolute Fury turned to face it, engines glowing, weapons charging. The time for investigation had ended. Humanity had stepped into an ancient war, one they never started, but now they would finish it. The moment the Starburner scout tore through the rift near the broken moon, a wave of heat and distorted light washed over the Resolute Fury, causing the ship's hull to groan as though space itself protested. The thing's presence. It wasn't just a ship, it was alive, shaped like a molten spearhead, with glowing fractures running along its body like veins of fire, and eyes, or what looked like eyes, that pulsed with the dull red of dying stars, and when it turned toward the Terran fleet, the bridge fell into an unnatural silence, the kind that made hearts beat faster without knowing why, and even the AI assistants inside the warships began to slow down, whispering warnings without understanding what they were sensing. For this was no machine from the galaxy, they knew this was older. A creature born from the hunger of suns and the silence after screams. But Captain Alina Voss stood firm at the helm of the Resolute Fury, her hand clenched into a fist behind her back as she gave the first clear command: target lock the center of mass, fire all railguns in sequence. And her voice cut through the fear like steel slicing smoke. The order shot through the fleet, and the Terran ships moved as one, trained, ready, built for war in ways the rest of the galaxy had long feared but rarely witnessed. And as the Starburner moved, fast and fluid like a serpent swimming through the stars, the first barrage of hypervelocity rounds slammed into it, cracking its molten armor and sending sprays of glowing liquid across the void. Yet it didn't die. It screamed a noise that wasn't heard through ears but felt in bones, like a pressure from the inside out, and it responded with a beam of pure fusion light, arcing toward one of the escort cruisers, the Falcon's Cry, which tried to evade but took the hit across its port side, the hull folding and melting like wax under a blowtorch, the ship spiraling into the shadow of the broken moon, lights flickering as escape pods launched in every direction. The Resolute Fury shifted position, placing itself between the wounded ship and the Starburner, and Voss shouted again, "Activate mirror field, full spectrum jamming, deploy void spikes," and from the underbelly of the Terran flagship, a wave of dark, needle-shaped drones launched out, spreading in a geometric pattern around the Starburner and projecting interference fields designed to tear at anything that moved faster than light. And though the creature tried to retreat, it staggered, its motion fractured, as if it had suddenly forgotten how to swim through the stars. And that was when the Terran fleet unleashed their second wave, this time with missile pods that didn't explode on impact, but pierced deep, and deployed fusion destabilizers, tech created not to disable, but to erase, and the Starburner flared up like a sun in agony, spinning, warping, then collapsing inward with a blast that bent light around it and sent shockwaves through nearby systems. When the light faded, there was no trace of the creature left, only a cloud of superheated dust and the twisted echoes of its scream. But silence didn't mean victory, it meant something worse, because every sensor across the fleet began to report anomalies, new energy signatures, far away but approaching fast, dozens of them, maybe more. And a Siri's voice returned to the comms, barely holding itself together. "You have killed a flame. Now the fire comes." And with those words, the mood on the bridge turned colder than space, because they all understood what had happened. The Terran fleet had just killed a scout, not a full Starburner, just one. And now the others knew. Voss turned to her second-in-command, Commander Rios, and said quietly, "Prepare the fleet to jump coordinate with High Command. We need reinforcements, now." But even as the command was carried out, she knew they wouldn't make it out in time if the larger forces arrived, so she made a decision she hadn't expected to make so soon. She opened the emergency war files, known as Protocol Ashfall, which detailed forgotten weapons from Earth's darkest vaults, tech outlawed in peace, feared even by their creators, weapons that could turn stars into black holes or infect A's with madness. And she gave the command to Prime 1, the Omega Lance, a spear of folded space designed to pierce through artificial gravity wells and detonate at quantum depth, effectively destroying anything it hit with a pocket singularity. And while her engineers scrambled to arm it, the vault on the moon below them pulsed once again. Not with fear, but with response. The sentinel inside had seen the Starburner fall and had judged the Terrans not as enemies but as warriors, and it moved for the first time, placing its hand on the final cryopod, awakening the last living K-Real, a being so thin and faint it barely seemed alive. but its eyes opened, and in those eyes were the memories of a civilization lost. To fire in silence, the Sentinel activated a signal. And to the Terran fleet, it sent a message not in words, but in a map, a path through forgotten stars, a map of the harvester points where the starburners were feeding, and at the center, marked in ancient symbols, a system labeled Furnace Core, the birthplace of the starburners and the source of their fire. And Voss looked at the map, at the still smoking remains of the starburner they had just destroyed, and made her second decision. They wouldn't wait for the next attack, they would go to the source and end the fire where it began. And as the fleet made its first jump toward the nearest harvester location, leaving behind the broken moon and the vault of echoes, the galaxy shifted. For the Deathworlders were no longer answering a call for help, they were hunting the fire, and in their path, no flame would stand. The jump through fold space was long and heavy, the stars outside the Terran fleet blurring into streaks of light, as if the universe itself held its breath, and aboard the Resolute Fury, Captain Alina Voss stood alone in the war room, staring at the ancient map transmitted by the Sentinel from the Moon Vault, a map carved in light and memory, showing the paths the starburners used, the places they fed, and most importantly, the heart of it all, the Furnace Core, a system so deep in forbidden space that even Terran scouts had never dared venture near it. But now, after the fall of the first starburner, they had no choice, because the fire was awake and coming, and Voss knew waiting meant death, not just for her fleet, but for every human colony within reach of the starburner's long-burning hunger. The rest of the fleet followed her lead, 3 heavy warships and a dozen escorts, reinforced by the arrival of the Iron Herald, an experimental dreadnought armed with particle rifts and solar spears, weapons never used in combat, built not to fight enemies but to erase them, and now they were being pointed at a threat older than war itself. Yet not every voice in the fleet agreed. Some captains argued for retreat, saying they had not right to attack a homeworld, even one belonging to monsters of fire and ash. But Voss silenced them all with a single answer. They answered a signal with death. We will answer it with justice. No one spoke against her again, because they all remembered the way the starburner scout screamed when it died, and the way the sky bent around its body when it came through the rift, like the laws of reality were sickened by its presence. So the fleet traveled in silence, guided by the sentinels. Data. While deep below in the medbay, the last K-Real survivor lay in stasis, its thin body still healing from centuries of frozen sleep, and the sentinel, silent now, stood watch, like a statue of a forgotten god, its only purpose to protect, even across time and extinction. Finally, after 2 long jumps and an eerie glide through dark systems stripped of all life, the fleet arrived at the first harvester point, and what they found chilled them. An entire gas giant, its surface cracked, spinning unnaturally, surrounded by orbiting machines shaped like spiderwebs of light and bone, slowly siphoning energy from the planet's core into long spires that glowed with the same deep red as the starburner's eyes. And inside those spires, life forms moved, not entirely physical, not entirely energy, but both young starburners, being shaped, fed, taught by the machines around them. And Voss saw it for what it was, a nursery, and her heart hardened, because this was not a civilization, this was a weapon factory that birthed nightmares. And so she gave her command. Humanity's answer is fire, and the fleet struck, fast and without mercy, the Iron Herald opening first with a lance of compressed gravity that split one of the spires in half, sending its contents spiraling into the gas giant's crushing clouds, while the Resolute Fury led a tight formation around the others, targeting the energy collectors with micro-singularity torpedoes, each one punching holes in the web like machines and causing chain reactions that blackened the sky with burning debris. The young starburners tried to escape, flaring like suns, but they were weak, unformed, and the Terran weapons were built for full-grown killers. So within minutes, the entire harvester site was gone, turned into a swirling field of broken light and falling ash. And as they watched it burn, the Sentinel sent a new message across the bridge. This is how they begin. Now you know what must end, and Voss replied with a quiet nod before turning to the navigation officer. Plot course for the next one. And so it continued, system by system, the Terran fleet moving like a black tide, washing over each harvester point, crushing spires and breaking the machines that fed the Starburners' rebirth, until only one location remained, the furnace core itself, and the moment they jumped into that space, the stars vanished, because the system didn't just block light, it swallowed it. The furnace core was a collapsed cluster of dead stars wrapped around a black hole, and orbiting the edge of that gravity. Well was a ring world, massive, cracked, and glowing with inner fire a forge, not for weapons, but for life, and at its center rose a spire larger than most moons, shaped like a twisted tree made of flame and crystal, pulsing like a heart, and Voss understood then that this was the true cradle of the Starburners, the place where the first of them had been shaped long before humans took their first breath, and already she could see them, dozens, maybe hundreds, rising from the ring world's surface, pulling themselves free from molten lakes and glowing chambers, their bodies brighter and hotter than the scout they had faced, each one a creature of war, and they had seen the Terran fleet coming. They had felt the deaths of their young, and now they rose not to defend, but to destroy, and the final battle had begun. Voss gave the signal, and the fleet scattered into combat formations, unleashing every weapon they had, while the Iron Herald dove toward the spire, its Omega Lance primed to punch into the core and detonate with a singularity strong enough to shatter the entire structure. But the Starburners struck back hard, burning through ships, splitting them open with beams of living flame, and for everyone that fell, another rose, until the sky above the ring world was a sea of fire and steel, and even the Terran battle-hardened AI systems began to fracture under the weight of it all. But still they fought, because humanity had been born on a death world and taught to stand against impossible odds. And in that moment, surrounded by enemies older than death, they remembered who they were: not just survivors, not just warriors, but firewalkers, stormbringers, the ones who answered fear with fury. And as the Iron Herald pierced the final layer of the spire, its captain gave a single word now, and the Omega Lance struck deep, shattering the spire's heart with a burst of silent gravity, collapsing the forge from within, and the ring world cracked, its orbit breaking, its heat spilling into the blackness of space as the Starburners screamed again. But this time it was different. This time it was not rage, but fear, because they were dying, their cradle undone, their fire smothered by the very hands they had once looked upon as prey. And as the Terran fleet pulled back, half destroyed, burned, and bleeding, the darkness behind them filled with light, not from the enemy, but from the collapsing forge, which now burned itself out like a candle in the void. And when the last flare faded, there was silence again, and the Sentinel's voice spoke once more. Your answer was enough, and Voss, eyes tired but fierce, whispered to herself, let them remember that. The silence after the fire was not peace, it was something else, something colder, heavier, like the air after a great storm when the damage is done, and nothing is left but broken things and questions no one dares to ask. The ring world of the furnace core was gone, shattered into drifting shards glowing faintly in the void, the once blazing forge now reduced to a dull ember in the endless dark, and around the dead system, the battered remains of the Terran fleet floated, half their ships destroyed, their weapons quiet, their engines barely burning, and inside the resolute fury, Captain Alina Voss stood on the darkened bridge with her hands resting on the back of her command chair, eyes fixed on the black hole at the center of the system, as though waiting for something more to come, because victory had not brought relief, it had brought silence, and that silence pressed on her chest like a weight she couldn't move. The Sentinel, still linked through the ship's systems, had not spoken since the final message it simply watched, no longer glowing, its purpose complete, and the last of the K-Reel lay in stasis, not waking, not dying, just resting, like the last echo of a forgotten song, while the crew, exhausted, moved through the corridors of their ship in a kind of daze, repairing systems, tending to the wounded, and counting the names of the dead, a list that grew longer every hour, because even though the battle had ended, the wounds it left behind were slow to close. Across the other surviving ships, it was the same quiet halls, dim lights, voices low and careful, as if speaking too loudly might bring the fire back, and every captain sent the same message to Voss. What now? But she had no answer yet, because something still felt wrong, not unfinished, just not right, like a story missing its last line, and she began to wonder if perhaps the battle had not been the end, but only the beginning of something worse. Then, 3 days after the fall of the forge, it came a ripple through space, soft and slow, barely strong enough to trip the outer sensors, but strange enough that every system flagged it at once, and when they traced its origin, they found nothing, just a point in space where the ripple had begun, far from the forge, far from the wreckage, in a place that should have been empty and yet wasn't, because something had moved there. Not a ship, not a creature, but a presence, like a thought stretched across space, and it spoke not in sound, but in data. One single line repeated in a dozen frequencies. We saw the fire fall. We remember. That was all. No name, no face, just the message, and it was followed by another ripple, stronger this time, closer, like something answering the silence. And as the ships turned their sensors outward, searching for the source, they found faint traces of ruins, deep space stations lost to time, once used by ancient races to observe the furnace core, their designs unlike anything in current galactic archives. And inside those ruins were carvings, records, all showing the same image over and over. Again, a ring of fire surrounding a black star, and always, outside the ring, tiny shapes, humanoid in form, walking through the flames unburned. Voss studied these images carefully, comparing them to the events her fleet had just survived, and slowly a theory began to form, one that made her blood run cold. What if the Starburners had not been alone? What if they were only one part of something greater? Not gods, not masters, but tools? And worse, what if the signal they had responded to the original SOS that drew humanity into this war had not been a call for help, but a test? A lure? A measure of humanity's will to fight? That idea took root and wouldn't let go, especially when another signal arrived. This time from Earth itself, sent from the Terran High Command. We've intercepted echoes. Multiple systems across the outer reach have reported similar fire anomalies. The forge may have fallen, but the fire is not dead. And with those words, the truth became impossible to deny. Humanity had struck a blow. Yes, a powerful one, but they had not ended the war, only awakened something larger, something older, something waiting for a worthy opponent. And now, across the stars, new signals were being received, some silent, some strange, some openly hostile, each one suggesting that the death of the Forge had not scared the galaxy, but stirred it. And as more ruins were uncovered, more records decoded, Voss realized that the Starburners had not been a single species, but one branch of a vast ecosystem of energy-born beings, all connected to the furnace core. And with that core shattered, the others would either die or evolve, and if they evolved, they would remember who had struck the first true blow. Back on the resolute Fury, Voss stood with her officers, staring at the galaxy map now cluttered with red flags and warning markers, and she spoke not as a captain, but as a voice for her people. We were never meant to stay in the cradle forever. We climbed from Deathworlds to stars because we were never meant to kneel. If they want silence, they'll find none here. If they want to test us, they'll see what the fire taught us. Around her, heads nodded not with joy, but with understanding, because they knew now that the galaxy was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And yet, they would not back down, because humanity had answered once, and would answer again if it came to that. And as the fleet prepared to return home, to warn Earth, to prepare the colonies, to begin building not just for peace, but for the next fire, Voss looked once more at the fading light of the broken forge and whispered to herself, "To the silence, to the stars beyond, let this quiet not be mistaken for surrender. It is only breath before the next storm." And somewhere in that vast darkness, something stirred in reply, not a flame, but a flicker, like the eye of something waiting, watching, patient, and not afraid.